For startups hiring engineers and engineers looking to join them, this podcast is for you.
Welcome to Your Next Tech Startup. I am host Isabel Rasmussen. Today we are doing a just hired episode with Ibrah, who is a senior solutions engineer at Arthur.ai, which we actually featured a couple months ago on a Now Hiring episode. So today we're going to be talking about his experience as a candidate and how he learned to improve his storytelling skills, and that helped him land a role. So first thing I would love to kind of hear from you about is a bit about like this last interview process for you. You were fortunate enough not to be impacted by any layoffs, so you were having to kind of balance a full-time role while interviewing, which is difficult.
Challenging. Yeah.
Yes. And about how long were you looking for a new role?
I was looking for a new role between 3 to 4 months officially, but unofficially I was kind of in the market for around a year. So like when I moved to New York.
Okay. So looking seriously for 3 to 4 months.
Yes, looking.
What did that look like? Was it applying to roles? Was it utilizing your network? Was it getting back to recruiters reaching out to you through email or LinkedIn?
So mainly it was like following up with recruiters unless I saw a job posting that I really wanted. Like balancing, like you said, balancing a full-time job with applying becomes a chore. You want to turn off your brain at night, but you can't because you want to apply for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But replying to recruiters was the easiest one because I could always do it from my phone.
Okay. And so curious, because you'd said kind of like a year, but more seriously, 3 months. And using like replying to recruiters as your main way of getting interviews, was it that the number of recruiters reaching out to you had changed?
Yes. I think at around September of last year, I saw like at least 2 to 3 times the number of recruiter messages that were coming into my inbox, which kind of made me realize that there was an increased demand for my position in the role. So I like accelerated my searching. Whereas at the beginning, it was very much like one message every couple of weeks. And I knew I kind of knew the role wouldn't fit into my priorities or what I wanted.
Okay. Yeah. And I do feel like I've been hearing solutions engineers are a role I've hired for maybe like 2% of like the hiring for engineering that I've done has been those type of roles. But I have heard that it is a role that is increasing in demand.
Yeah, it's very interesting because like solution engineering or like whatever they call it now, deployment engineer, pre-sales engineer, they're all basic, like the role always existed. It was just kind of a different name, like as a consultant or integration consultant. I think people are now realizing that, or companies are now realizing that there is a very big need to embed engineering either in the pre-sales role or also in the like just closed role. Like you just close the deal, you want an engineer there that isn't from your development team to kind of guide people through, talk to them, guide them through the entire process to be ready to talk to an engineer.
Okay. And so potentially maybe like 5-10 years ago that people were just kind of pulling development engineers more likely into these conversations. And now there's more recognition that there's a better way.
Yeah, especially with like, you don't want to waste time of one of your development engineers, like actual dev team, to be on a pre-sales call. But for somebody that's fully client-facing, it makes sense. And I think the skills are a little bit different too.
Yeah.
You need to be able to have both a sales conversation and a technical conversation with your clients and stakeholders.
Right. And I know like, for regularly like full stack engineer hiring, there's like a focus on, are they able to have non-technical conversations with like product, with, other counterparts, but very rarely are they looking for someone who can actually speak to a client?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's a much higher communication kind of expectations and bar. Okay. So mainly through recruiters reaching out to you. And then any idea on how many like early and late stage interviews you were a part of?
Off the top of my head, I think I interviewed at around 63 companies.
63.
Yeah, where around 13 to 15 of them were late stage
Interviews. Okay.
interviews. Even though 63 sounds like a huge number, not a lot of them were fully technical interviews.
Yeah. Right. Like a
Um,
lot of times you're talking to the recruiter or like having like those first round like conversations.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
like either my priorities don't align or their
right.
priorities don't align. And I was just like, let's not waste either of our times.
But that's still like over, well, I guess it isn't exactly 3 to 4 months because there was some
Yeah.
of that interviewing happening over a year. Like, talk about like balancing your role and interviews. That's a lot. Okay. And let's see. So, what would you say, kind of was the most frustrating part of this recent search?
I think it's always misrepresentation. I've realized a lot of companies' listings have very fancy words there, very fancy definitions of the role. And then once you sit down with a recruiter or somebody from the team, you realize that there's a completely different expectation than what was written out on the job listing initially.
Yeah, I think as a recruiter, I will say oftentimes job descriptions are not updated.
Yeah.
And for a startup, that is incredibly problematic because things are supposed to be changing so quickly.
Yeah.
So your job description should be pretty outdated.
And I think it's more the issue of the company itself than the recruiter. I've realized recruiters tell me the same thing that the job description tells me, but
Oh,
once I talk to like somebody from the team, I realize that there's a shift here. And I think it's just there's you don't always communicate with who you're recruiting to, I'm assuming. You just get the mandate, you talk to them a couple of times, and then go.
yeah, there is definitely the sharing of information that gets tricky.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so just kind of things not being like what you thought they were
Yeah.
going to be, and that being like the most frustrating point. Okay, and as I had said at the beginning, what we're going to be talking about is the ability to tell a story in an interview process. I'll often say to a candidate, if you tell me you are great at working with other people, that doesn't stick. Like, there's nothing behind that. But if you actually give me an example of something specific you did for someone else on your team or for, a specific group, then that sticks. And so
Yeah.
that is that stickiness of storytelling. Okay, so we're going to do, I guess, role play. So I'm going to ask you a question. And the first time round, you're going to answer the question like how you used to answer it in a non-storytelling format.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So tell me about a time that you had to resolve a conflict.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. At my previous role, I had a client that asked for something to be put on the roadmap for our product. And I went to the dev team and the product team, and they were very busy and they said no. So I talked to them a little bit and they were able to accommodate the change and they added it to the roadmap. And I outlined the requirements. We worked in Python, we worked in Java, we worked in SQL, and I was able to showcase and deliver the clear value to them and the clients. So we resolved the conflict between the product team and myself and the dev team, as well as the conflict between internal product and the client. Just to add, I think this is a very good question because you have to kind of tell a story.
Yeah, I know. I'm listening to you and I'm
Yeah.
like, you are telling a story. I would say it's not memorable.
Yes. And I think that's the thing. I feel like as much as people, like some of the questions that you can ask, I could just list out qualifications. Like, for example, the one you used earlier was like, what project did you work on that you're very proud of? But with telling a conflict, like resolved conflict, you have to, like, regardless of what it is, people have to establish the conflict. And I think this will always be a story, but it's not really a story that you're going to walk away and be like, oh, he's good at resolving conflict, or oh, I got
Right.
what I wanted out of it.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point because like I'm listening to you and I'm just like, okay, like this is a better answer than other answers
Yes.
I've heard.
Yeah.
But right, like, but I think that is, and really at the core of like when you're preparing to interview is thinking about, is this person is the interviewer going to walk away feeling confident that I am able to resolve conflict? And I will say that from that story that like you did more of like a checkbox versus so there's no red flags in that story, but there wasn't anything that had like, definitely that's not like a 4. And I say a 4
Yeah.
because most of the rating systems and an applicant tracking is like one is a hell no to a hire, 2 is a no hire, 3 is a hire, and 4 is a hell yes
Yeah.
to a hire. So yeah, so you gave like kind of like a mild 3.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's at most a 3. It's one of those stories where I think a lot of people, when I interview, give me some sort of version of this story, mainly because they hope that their technical questions or whatever answers they got before can back this one up. And like we can talk about accomplishments and everything because you can dress them up, but it's a little bit more difficult to dress up if you're not able to tell a story.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's do the story
The
version.
real story version.
Yes.
Like I think, and I've done this multiple times with a lot of people, so I'm like this might sound very coached because I've coached myself into it. Do you want to ask it again or should I go?
Yeah, I'll ask it
All
again.
right, please.
Okay. So tell me a story about how you resolved conflict.
Okay, so as a solution engineer, and in my previous role, and what I assume will be one of my requirements in my next role, is that a lot of my responsibility falls to both the client as well as the company that I'm working at. So it might fall out of scope from both a product perspective and a development perspective, but it falls into scope for either pre-sales, sales, or even upselling. So my role is always going to be to bridge that gap between the pre-sale cycle or the sales cycle as well as the product and dev team. So one time I had a client ask me for a very substantial additive to the product. So it wasn't as much of a change as it was an added value to one of the features that we had. I went back to our product and dev team and had a strong no, which a lot of the product teams tend to say no to. A lot of the dev teams are very protective of their roadmap, very protective of their sprints. So a lot of the time I get no. So I went back, had a conversation with one of our developers and one of our product leads to understand what their requirements were in terms of a roadmap and how they viewed my change. So in general, that would fall into one of 3 categories. A hell no, it's just not something that we can do right now, or it's just out of scope and we don't know what we don't know. So with that in mind, I went back to our client and had a frank conversation with them, laying out our current challenges. This led us to understand, one, what their actual requirements were now and actual prioritization. And then the third thing that it led us to understand is how likely it is for them to either buy, upsell, and continue using our product with that change in mind. Once I had that understanding, I was able to go heads down and code an MVP. So once I had an MVP in place, I went back to our product and development team and had a conversation showing them the demo of the MVP. And then from there was able to get agreement over implementing some of the things that I have already done in the MVP into their roadmap, as well as add the changes that are needed to give the full change or the full product suite to the client within a reasonable amount of time, giving us both a win for the client and making product and dev also incorporated within the process and feeling like they've not only won, but they've gotten us to compromise. So yeah, much better answer.
Yeah. The one thing that I'm left wondering with is if that, because I know this is oftentimes like
Mhm.
a SaaS like problem is, are we doing that just for one client?
Yeah.
Or is this something that actually they didn't see it at the time, but you advocating for it, that it ended up helping, 10 or 100 clients? And
Mhm.
so that would be the one thing that I would say,
Yeah.
like, is did this advance things beyond that client, or like
Mhm.
was that client like, yeah, like a little bit of the financial impact of
Yeah.
making that client happy?
I think it's always like for me when I'm interviewing, it's always a balance because I don't necessarily want to give all the answers in one go
Mm.
because I want this to be a conversation.
Okay, right. So you're expecting that as a follow-up question.
Like I expect that one as a follow-up question. Sometimes I expect how technically complex was the change or how difficult it was. Because at some point, as much as I want to tell the story, I don't want to monopolize the full interview with
Right, right.
with the story.
Yeah. And so what I would say with that is, and then we'll get into
Yeah.
what I liked about what you said, is a great way to end, especially like when you're giving a decent sized answer is, did I cover everything, or is there anything else that you want to ask me about
Yeah.
that? Everyone is a seasoned interviewer,
Yeah.
and there's so many times that I've read feedback of they didn't do this, they didn't do this. And I'm always like, well, did you ask? I think as a candidate, to control the process in your favor as much as possible, that like creating that opportunity or almost reminder,
Hmm.
hey, did I answer everything that you wanted to know? Is there anything else that I can go deeper in on?
Yeah. That's an
So it just
interesting bit
adds.
of feedback. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good,
Um,
yeah, good one.
so what I liked about that answer is that, and I was gonna like start taking notes, like, because that's what I normally do as a recruiter. Like, it gave me a idea of like how you work, which I think you had talked about as a part of your intent is, it gave me a deeper sense of your style of working with people, how you approach things, which then giving me more of that sense of you and how you are, is that has me walk away feeling more confident
Mhm.
about
Yeah.
this is someone that their style of working could fit the team. With me not interviewing a ton of solutions
Yeah.
engineers, the MVP part of it, I wasn't sure how common that
Hmm.
is for a solutions engineer to do.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that like when you're talking to someone who, and it's hard to know always
Yeah.
if the person that you're talking to, how much they do or don't know
Yeah.
about the role. But I don't even know if I'm not aware of a technical recruiter who specializes in hiring
Mhm.
solutions engineers. So I would say, yeah, that like kind of assume a lot of people, and even engineering managers, directors of engineering, like they're not necessarily like super specialized in
Yeah.
hiring solutions engineers.
Yeah.
So
It's a
yeah, so
very
I
black box of a kind of a role currently.
yeah. And so I think like in that story, like you did a really great job of like walking through how you do all the pieces. Such like an ego complicated thing. You don't want to necessarily be like, so I don't know what would have been the right way. Well, normally people don't do an MVP, but I did one.
Yeah. I think it's complicated with a lot of these because having been in this role for around 3, 4 years, I didn't do an MVP all the time. It really always depended on likely it was that I thought this was an opportunity to win a client, to keep a client, or to make them happy. And sometimes you get no's. And sometimes you go into conflict situations and you lose. Like you never really resolve every single conflict you're in.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to like obviously I hope people listening don't phrase everything the same way I did because it's always it's a good opportunity to always showcase how you think about things because it protects like it usually protects me from understanding if the person I'm interviewing would like my style of work, or would be able to kind of see the threads of how it was working. So sometimes the questions I get asked actually make me understand more about the person I'm getting interviewed by than the questions I can ask at the
Yeah.
end.
Well, and that also makes me think about how important it is that interviewing is a two-way street.
Yeah.
And so your ability to uniquely describe how you work, if the person who, and in theory, that's the hiring manager who's like kind of making that call, but it could be another solutions engineer on the team, but if the way you work is incredibly different than how they do things, so much better to figure that out in the interview process than to join a company that you have to drastically change how you work in a way that doesn't make you happy.
Or interview again. Like I wouldn't want to, like coming out of my last interview cycle, I didn't want to join Arthur and then be like, well, I don't like working with these people. I have to look for another job, which doesn't look great on your resume. Again, I know a lot of people who've done that, who've tended to just remove that job from their resumes just because they're like, oh, we were there like less than 2 months. That's not great.
And there's so much stress.
Yeah.
Like that's involved. Like, yeah, one time I think I stayed for 9 months, but like I joined a startup that I curse a lot and like nobody cursed.
Yeah.
And cursing is such a weird example, but like I just like didn't fit the culture.
Yeah.
And there's other
actually a very
too.
good example, because I've used that as also a benchmark, because I tend to also curse a lot at some points in time, but they're all in jest. Like, they're not. They're like obviously they're
right.
never.
It's not like you're
directed.
angry throwing things around cursing.
And I think there's a lot of times where you want to jump on a call with one of your colleagues or somebody and be like, "This is terrible," and you want to get your frustrations out, in a way that's like obviously just like a 5-minute constructive yelling match to yourself. And I've worked with teams, because I've worked with a lot of clients. I've worked with teams that I really felt like I wouldn't be able to show up in a t-shirt, let alone curse. And it really does a number on your work quality. Because
it's that ability to be yourself. And if you can't be yourself at work and you're having to compartmentalize, it's exhausting.
Yeah. And I think like storytelling is good with that, because when I'm telling a story, regardless of what question I'm being asked, they all will showcase a part of me, which is something I don't really necessarily enjoy in interviewing right now, is that everybody's very mechanical.
Yeah.
And it becomes a peeling the onion kind of thing. I don't want to be doing emotional labor when I'm interviewing. I want to be having a conversation, either as an interviewee or an interviewer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's such a great point. And oftentimes there's the technical and non-technical, because tell me about a project where you had big impact, and tell me about resolving conflict, like a technical question and a non-technical question. And if you, in a technical question, can share your soft skills, answer those non-technical questions, it like allows people to kind of check more positive boxes about you earlier on, which is such like a smart way to interview.
Yeah, it also makes it easier to be able to fit more things. Like we all have resumes that are like long. We're trying to sit here and put them in one page so like whomever doesn't get bored reading it. And like resumes barely tell a story.
Yeah.
And they even barely tell accomplishments. You wouldn't hire somebody who's only basically trying to list out their accomplishments. That doesn't give me the sense that they're the nicest person or the easiest person to work with, or even, which is another thing, like the most confident person. because they need a piece of paper in front of them or they need to read that. I think at the beginning of my career, I always had my resume open because I was like, I didn't do much yet. Like, I need to justify it. I need to say things. But the more I've interviewed, the more I was like, I don't need to have, I did them. I know them.
Yeah.
Whatever comes to mind that is appropriate with this company or with this specific interview, I'll talk about. And I used to prepare my stories with basically like the basic style of storytelling that we've learned all as children. Like we have to establish what the conflict is, like,
Right.
but you also have to give us a little bit of an introduction, set the play, set the story, give us the conflict, and then give us the resolution.
Right.
Like, there needs to be stakes in every single one of your stories. If there's no stakes, you wouldn't actually care or remember when you're relaying this information. And if you get asked, why did you check this box? You could just be like, well, gave me an answer that, like, at the time I felt like it was, like, checked, but I don't actually remember what it was.
Yeah, right. And like, and because now you're like on the other side and doing the interviewing, those debrief meetings is where that like comes up, is you're having those conversations. And, if you're advocating to hire the candidate, but you can't really speak to why, and somebody else on the team is advocating not hiring the candidate and they can speak to why, that no hire voice is going to win.
Yeah. It's also easier to remember to find reasons why not.
I know.
It's like it's always easier, and that's an unfortunate reality, is that like we all in the startup world need everything to work quickly, to be done well in the first time, because we don't have time. Everything can change in literally an hour.
Yeah.
So we're always trying to find a unicorn candidate or a perfect candidate.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, if the candidate doesn't give us why yes, it's always going to be a no. And the problem is, you have 3 options. It's yes, maybe, no. 2 of them mean no.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to hire maybes.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. Yeah, like I would say since hiring in 2023, like I've kind of, something that I started saying is like it used to be there's no room for red flags and now there's no room for yellow flags, which yellow flags are maybes.
Yeah.
You have to knock it out of the park on everything. So it does make hiring harder. I always think, because most of my hiring is engineers, that engineers, you're supposed to find problems. And so I'm just like, oh my God, you guys drive me nuts.
Yeah.
Like in a debrief meeting, because I'll go into a debrief meeting and a candidate will have like their, like we said, that 4-point score system. And so their overall score would be like a 3.25. And so I'm going to that meeting like, okay, good, we're going to get a hire. And that's not actually what ends up happening. The score indicates that there should be a hire, but I've always kind of felt that engineers are so problem focused, and that's how your brains work, and that's what like makes you great engineers, that it's so easy to then go into a problem. I will say it's the recruiter or the hiring manager's responsibility to manage that group think and try to pull people back and not go into those rabbit holes. But the reality is, like you said, is if there are maybes that start to happen in a debrief, maybe becomes a no.
Yeah. And I think the other issue that I've found in interviewing, either for Arthur or for my like in my previous role, because I also interviewed there, like was an interviewer there.
Yeah.
I think there's always a sense, and I've interviewed technical and non-technical folks alike, there's always a sense that the technical people are too focused on the tech side of things. And the problem will always remain that when I'm interviewing somebody, I want to see if they're going to be rigid or if they're going to be flexible within the role, if the demands of the role are going to allow them to pivot at some point, because like no matter what job you're doing, no matter what industry you're doing, you have to be able to pivot at some point.
Yeah.
And a lot of technical people, especially those that, because I come from an engineering background, so I worked as a developer before, and I know the issues that you speak of. But the main issue is a lot of them are just rigid within their own little world, within their own little bubble.
Yeah.
And you always have to be able to talk them out, like off the ledge, because a maybe it can be a maybe for good reasons.
Yeah.
Like maybe they don't have enough experience, maybe they don't have the requisite knowledge. But a lot of the time, especially with startups,
Yeah.
is like that maybe can be turned into a yes if, as an interviewee, I can tell the recruiter or the hiring manager that I am adaptable, that I've learned before, that I am malleable. Because those maybes, especially the ones that showcase you as inexperienced or that showcase you as knowledgeable, are coachable.
Yeah.
And then
Right. As long as you're not rigid.
exactly, as long as you're
Yeah.
not rigid. So it moves from a maybe to like a maybe conversation to, do we have the time to train them up on these things? Do they have the
Right.
capacity or capabilities to self-teach themselves these things?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've been in those debrief meetings when I'm hiring the first front-end engineer. I remember having that conversation and just being like, there's no room for teachers and there's no room for any of those things. And it's hard for a candidate to hear,
Yeah.
you would be amazing on this team in a year from now,
Yeah.
like, or in 6 months from now.
Yeah.
But early stage early stage startups and hiring, like, that's just like the complicated reality. And that's also why it's easier to get a team from, like you said, a maybe to a yes, when you're interviewing for like a Series C startup.
Yeah.
I've also been a part of those conversations where that rigidness comes out. Like, I'll pick it up, like, gosh, I think like just last month, like, I'm just like, oh, why did I interview this person? But like, even in their like reply to me, they kind of like started picking on the languages. And number one, I'm just like, I'm the recruiter. I'm not changing the languages.
Yeah.
Like, why are you telling me that Golang is better than TypeScript or what? Like,
Yeah.
and anyways, and so they did that on the phone call too. And it was just like, you're rigid.
Yeah.
That's like completely misaligned.
Yeah. It would work at a big company. It would work at like a company that, like a Google or a Microsoft, if you're using their tech stack and you're very rigid, they like that. They don't want like a lot more, because there's 1,000 people working on the engineering team and you become a number to them after the hiring. So like, especially when, like, I interviewed for Facebook, I interviewed for AWS, and it was very much like stifling creativity in some senses, especially when you're starting out. Like, a lot of their roles, a lot of their demands are just like, how good are you technically? How good are you at following orders? Like, that's basically what they do, which is a completely different ball game when you look at AI and or any startups. Because like with startups, especially in the AI space, it's like, how quickly can you swim? Like, we're not even throwing you into the ocean. Like, you're just already there. So like, can you swim? Are you adaptable enough to look at your code, to look at an issue, to look at a client and be like, this is wrong, we need to pivot now and do it?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting, like, I've always done startup hiring. So that's interesting for your like perspective to hear from you, because I've not been involved at all in anything hiring that, because I'll have candidates do things and I'm just like, well, obviously, like, this is not going to work out. But that's interesting to hear that candidate is potentially doing really well in another environment. And that is part of the whole, like, find the right fit for yourself. And instead of like pretending to be somebody you're not or whatever, figure it out in the beginning. Like, if you want to be rigid, there's a place for you. If you want to be super adaptable and flexible, there's a place for you. But like, if you're not adaptable, don't pretend like you are, because you're going to be miserable. I feel like we could talk forever, but we probably should stop. So it has been so nice talking with you, and I feel like this was like so much more than a just hired episode. So.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Awesome. All right, have a great rest of your day.
You too.